or the defining characteristic.
It enables sort of formalizing conversations across disciplines, because it's hard to do.
By interacting with the Confluence Center, we can talk to folks who are interested in other ideas that aren't necessarily related to technology.
Tucson, being the city that it is, full of diversity, of population, of interests, of thought, is a perfect breeding ground for a center such as Confluence Center.
The impact of Confluence Center would be to really foster collaborations that can bring not only great ideas to our university, but also resources that can facilitate further areas of research and creative inquiry.
What I love about the Confluence Center is its ability to bring people together from different disciplines. I'm excited for what may come.
The Confluence Center for Creative Inquiry, enriching the collaborative atmosphere for innovative research and interdisciplinary endeavors at the University of Arizona and beyond.
Good morning. It's on? It's running live. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hi, my name is Catherine. I work for the bookstores. I want to welcome everybody here. Can you hear me? All the way in the back? No, you cannot? Yes, you can. Is that better? Okay. So welcome, everyone, to the bookstores at the University of Arizona. We're very happy to see you here this morning. I'm Catherine, work for the bookstores. I was just listening to that video, and Yvonne's voice is at the end, and she has a fantastic speaking voice. I didn't know that she was in radio for so many years. And anyway, that's besides the point. I'm just noticing it. I want to just give you a couple of quick things. We have a restroom that is private, but we will let you into it so you don't have to walk all the way upstairs and go all the way out into the cold. And if you need to use the restroom, it's located in that direction. And there are students at that counter, and they can let you into the private restroom area. Please silence your cell phones at this time. Thank you. Everyone, thank you. And I want to give a special welcome to the people who are here who are members of OLLI. OLLI, what does OLLI stand for? Real loud.
Oh, sure, lifelong learning.
That wasn't loud enough.
I can't remember all the words.
Osher Lifelong Learning. And the folks who are here can tell you about it if you're interested, if you don't know what it is. It's a wonderful organization that pretty much anybody can join. And the other thing I want to mention is the Confluence Center has been doing these events at the bookstore for, what, a year now? Yeah, a year. And we really hope that you tell your friends and your family about these events. I mean, they're free. The parking is free. The programs are fantastic. Yvonne and the rest of the crew put a tremendous amount of work into it. They have, and Dr. Fan, I'm ignoring Dr. Fan, excuse me, Dr. Fan, who's made this whole thing happen. And the wonderful musicians she brings. It's just phenomenal. So, at your end of year gift giving, you might want to remember the Confluence Center. Thanks so much. And I'll take this over to Yvonne, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for doing my job for me. I don't have to do that. There are envelopes over on the table over there if you'd like to make a tax-deductible contribution to the Confluence Center today. Everything we do is free, except for one thing, and that is our gala dinner. And we have a special deal for OLLI people. So if you take a look at that on your chairs, and Stu Goldman has volunteered to help put an OLLI table together. So we've made a special deal for OLLI folks for the gala, and that will be with Paula and Dr. John Hildebrand, and they'll be talking about science and music together. So, and that's at the Hacienda del Sol. It'll be a wonderful event. And do tell your friends, our next event here will be Every Black Woman, an exploration of identity. And a fine vocalist from from New York City will be coming, a friend of Paula's and a graduate of the U of A. And she'll be singing, and then we have Dr. Brian Carter from the Africana Studies Department will be speaking as well. So mark your calendars and tell your friends about that. And I'd like to introduce our director, Javier Duran.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here this morning, and we really appreciate your company and your attention. And I want to thank our team, especially Yvonne, Irving, Heather, Gray, Renier Ballesteros, and Ariel Tinney, who are here helping us. Stu Goldman is always a good friend and collaborator of, instigator of conference events. And what can I say about Paula Fan? She's a lot. But, I mean, the first religious professor from the College of Fine Arts, that she teaches piano and coaches vocal and instrumental chamber repertoire, that she's recorded over 19 albums, that she's been with the most famous musicians in the world performing, that she's an excellent mentor and an excellent professor and an excellent friend. And also, I think I want to highlight her passion about what she's doing and the fact that she has decided to partner with the Conference Center to create this important series that is making a difference not only at the level of the audience, but also at the level of friends and students in the School of Music and the College of Fine Arts. And I want to highlight her inclusiveness. Paula has worked with a number of people on campus to make sure that the artificial boundaries between science and art disappear. We have created these silos in which we think on little rooms, and I'm a scientist, and I'm this, but at the end of the day, all of us here at the university are here to seek new frontiers in knowledge and creativity, and that's the objective of the Conference Center. And also I want to highlight Paula's passion about social issues and animal rights. She is really passionate about having important members of our planet be recognized as inhabitants of the planet. And we'll sometimes joke about that in terms of her interest in animal life. But I want to highlight those things because Paula is such a wonderful partner in crime with the Conference Center. And I really want to thank you, Paula, for the success of this series and for all the things you've done for the Conference Center in this past year. And I want to let you talk a little bit about your guest and the program.
Can I go home now? Ladies and gentlemen, hit it.
Okay.
Seven years ago on the street, a madman spit at me, and 3 days later I threw up. About that time, my sister ate from my plate. Her next period was 3 weeks late. I wonder, could that have been some sort of sign? You see, that crazy man also sneezed on me that night. Since then, I've had an abdominal pain, which 15 doctors can't explain, and my left foot's one size larger than the right. So tell me, can I get it? If a little bit of spit hits me just beneath the eye, and the person who spit it is a rather flamboyant guy. Can I get it? If I'm licked by a kitten that a friend is babysitting for someone who I don't know, and that lovable kitten likes to drink from the toilet bowl. It's anxiety is getting me down, it's going around, and all my friends have got it too. I used to be quite stable, predictable if bland. I never gave a second thought to a pimple, wart, or swollen gland. Now I panic with each rash or cough or nervous tick, because HIV anxiety has got me worried sick. Last night I met this girl. It was kind of fun. How many times have I been to that bar down the street from where I work and never met anyone? As we talked, it became clear we had so much in common. She lives in Jersey, so do I offered her a lift to Tenafly. Once in the car, she slid over beside me. Next thing I knew, she was blowing in my ear. I tried to say no, but what the heck? I got carried away on 8th Avenue in a car with a stranger. After she finished, she said as she smiled up at me, "Thanks a lot. That'll be $60. Please, can I get it? If I thought it was attraction, not a business transaction, it was never my intention to have to pay.
My friends will tell me to get out and date, but I have a problem with the fact that when you sleep with anyone, you're sleeping with everyone that anyone has slept with before. Well, they had the friend of a friend call me. I told him I had tested 20 times. He laughed and said he'd only tested twice. He didn't say negative, but he didn't say positive. I assume he meant negative, which has a positive connotation now. But he's a lawyer, so I'm not sure I should trust him. Well, I finally gave in and I met him for dinner. I was too nervous to eat or talk much, but still he invited me home for the proverbial drink and whatever. By now I was feeling faint, so I went in his bathroom. I was trying to figure out what the little red mark on my lip might mean, when all of a sudden I noticed all of these medicines in his medicine cabinet, which I had just opened by accident. They were mostly for allergies and psoriasis, but you never can tell for sure. So I told him I wasn't feeling well and excused myself and hurried home. I know I shouldn't freak out, but there is still one thing I need to know.
Can I get it from a touch, from a touch, from touching too much, from touching the wrong one? From a caress or a kiss, a caress, or from kissing someone back when sex was still fun? Can I get it from a chair in the air, or from somebody's hair, or the germs you pick up on a $10 bill? From a mosquito or a beetle or a hypodermic needle on the beach, or a teacher or a dentist day? His anxiety is getting me down, it's going around, and all my friends have got it too.
I used to be so courageous,
Courageous.
fear I was immune.
Each day
the original AIDS quilt songbook, which appeared in 1992 in response to the cry from the classical baritone William Parker, who said, for singers we're being pretty unvocal about AIDS. This collection was put together by some of the great American composers of the time. William Parker himself was a champion of the American art song, as well as an operatic baritone. And this sound was sort of a cry to action for the classical world. This collection has grown in the last 20 to 30 years, and there was just a 20th anniversary celebration. New songs have appeared as essentially the landscape of the illness has changed during the last few decades. In honor of National AIDS Day, we're a little bit late, we would like to celebrate and examine this illness in music and in words. And this story, of course, is very sadly and tragically true, and it really hit home for me because I'm a woman of a certain age, and I remember in the early days when all my classmates were dying. This mysterious disease was decimating the ranks of what we call collaborative pianists, pianists who play with other people. And many of them were gay men. And my teacher just didn't understand what was happening, why all her students were dying. This is a fable, and so sharing the stage with me is my friend Dr. Joseph Alpert from UMC, and he has seen over the course of the decade change. Dr. Alpert.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially to be on the podium with my good friend and world-famous pianist Paula Fan.
Can you hear back there?
No, use the microphone.
Right
there.
Mic, okay.
I'll take the mic. Make sure.
I'm loud.
How about now? Can you hear me back there? Great. Okay. Well, it is a pleasure. Thank you, Paula. It's a delight to be on a venue like this with Paula. We've done a couple of things where we sort of breach medicine and the humanities before. And so I'm here to represent the medical side of things, but I'm also going to tell you some of my personal experiences as a physician with patients in the hospital with HIV/AIDS when I first came here 21 years ago. Let's talk a little bit about the science. By the way, those of you who are interested, it turns out that my favorite internet venue, Wikipedia, has 26 pages on HIV/AIDS, and it's very approachable. Of course, if you want to get into it deeply, all of you, of course, as citizens of Arizona, are welcome to come to the medical library at the medical school, and if you want to really get into some of the deeper science. But I think the 26 pages in Wikipedia is really more than enough, and I read it over and found it to be very accurate. It's like most Wikipedia writings, it's very crystal clear. So where did this epidemic come from? It's a virus. It's known as a retrovirus. You know that there is two components for heredity inside each of our cells. The DNA is the code, and the RNA is the messenger that carries the code message out into the cellular environment, and then usually results in the production of proteins and so forth that are all of the building blocks of the cells. And this virus is an RNA virus, and it has a coding on it. Once it gets into the cell, in a sense, it goes right and integrates itself into the DNA, and actually gets the DNA to start reproducing itself. And that's a very common method of reproduction by viruses. It appears to have originated in West Africa. There is a related retrovirus in the chimpanzees there, and as you probably know, many people in West Africa eat monkeys. And so when you hunt a monkey and you kill it, then with your bare hands, of course, you're skinning it, and it's very easy to get a little cut, and then you're mixing your blood with the blood of the monkey, and the virus gets transmitted. The first cases were recognized probably in Europe with sailors who had visited West Africa and been with prostitutes in West Africa. We'll talk more about how you transmit the disease. Of course, sex is one way, but there are many other ways to transmit it. Anytime there's contact with blood between two people, you can transmit the virus. It cannot live, by the way, the anxiety song, it can't live on toilet seats and petting cats and eating from the same spoon or fork and so forth. It's a very fragile virus until it gets into the system, and then it's very, very destructive. In any case, it then spread to Europe. It initially was a terrible scene in San Francisco in the 1960s and 70s when young, healthy gay men in the San Francisco gay community were dying of terrible infections, some rare and some common infections. And then the research both here and at the Institut Pasteur in Paris found the virus, identified it, and from that led to the industrial research that has led to very effective therapy. We can't totally eradicate the virus, but we can make it basically go into hibernation, if you will. And today, people who have HIV can lead essentially a full lifespan, although there are complications with the drug and so forth. In any case, at the present time, there's 38 million people in the world with HIV/AIDS. I can tell you a little bit more later about how HIV becomes AIDS and what it does to the immune system. But nevertheless, there's about 1.2 million people in the United States with this disease. The majority of people are in Africa, particularly Southern Africa. We'll talk about later. We're going to talk about the politics of HIV/AIDS and the terrible decisions that were made by the South African government some years ago that led to widespread transmission of this virus. In any case, I'll give you some personal anecdotes later about the horror of this epidemic before we had effective antiviral, antiretroviral antibiotic therapy, and watching young people die despite all the things we were doing with every antibiotic we could think of coming up with. But I'll stop there and come back later.
Has come down today to the hospital room. He rocks back and forth in the crisis. He says it's good we haven't lost our closeness, and cries as each one is taken. The disfigurement of young men and the wars of hard tongues and closed minds. The body in pain will bear such nobility, but words have the edge of poison when spoken bitterly. He takes a dying man in his arms and tells him how deeply flows the river that takes the old man and his friends this evening. It is the of dusk and lamentation, one of your strong flat boats, and we'll sail together all the way through evening,
So let's.
how ironic that I should be the one to go before you. How ironic. For years I read the many notices, dreamt of being survived by a long-time companion, not facing this alone. How ironic now that I know love and have found feelings long buried and strength unknown. I know the greater love is to survive, not to abandon you, but to be abandoned. How ironic, through loss we discover true now I grieve, not for myself, but for you, my leave behind, and for you who must face death
Well, let's just talk for a couple of minutes about some of the medical aspects of the infection. I think most of you know that what the virus does when it gets into the body initially, it creates something that's a little bit like a flu. Most people just blow it off and don't worry about it. You can have a little rash, but you're not really that sick. And then the virus sort of goes into a quiet period, a latency period, that can last for a number of years, during which time it's quietly reproducing in various cells and spreading from one cell to another. And eventually it finds its way into the immune system, and there's a particular cell called the CD4 cell, which is a lymphocyte, which we need to help us fight infections and organisms. You know that we have about 2 quarts of bacteria inside and on the surface of our body. And so we are constantly living with small organisms, and many of them actually help us in our digestive system and so forth. But occasionally they get out of control, and that's the immune system sort of keeps them under control. Well, you can imagine, think of it in terms of a military example, that suddenly everybody in the army gets sick, and of course then the enemy can invade. And that's exactly what happens, that eventually this virus destroys the CD4 cells, and you can actually tell how far advanced the disease is by measuring the number of CD4 cells in a small amount of blood. And you can tell how far the disease is spreading also because we can actually measure the number of virus particles in a small drop of blood. For most patients, the latency period is anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10 years, after which these infections start occurring. It turns out we always think of the horrible infections like bird tuberculosis and various funguses, like we have valley fever here, coccidiomycosis. But in fact, it turns out that ordinary pneumonias and skin infections with the strep and staph germs are actually even more common. The problem is they're very hard to treat because antibiotics alone won't kill the bugs. The antibiotics weaken the bugs, they kill a certain number, but if your immune system is not working, all you do is sort of hold the infection in slight control, but you never cure it. And then eventually what happens is that, particularly with the smart bacteria, a certain number of them are resistant to the antibiotics, and then of course the infection proceeds. And of course, some of the very difficult immune infections like bird tuberculosis and valley fever are difficult to eradicate even with antibiotics, even in people who have a good immune system. So at that point, of course, people become very sick, they lose weight, the heart can also be involved, people can develop heart failure, you can develop kidney failure, and the full-blown AIDS syndrome is a horrible illness, and particularly for the physicians and nurses caring for these patients, because without an attack directly on the virus, you're not going to win. You're just going to, for a relatively short period of time, hold the infection in abeyance, and then these young people, often young people, are going to die. So how is it transmitted? It's transmitted when you contact blood to blood. So you can do that with a dirty hypodermic needle. You can do it with bad blood transfusions, and that happened in the beginning. It happened, for example, in patients with hemophilia who were getting blood concentrates before we knew about this virus. And so many of the hemophiliacs in the 1960s and 70s came down with HIV/AIDS. And of course, it's transmitted by sex, in which there's little tiny breaks in the skin of both partners, and then the virus can be transmitted across from that one little injury, let's say in the vagina or in the anus to the penis, or back and forth either way. And once the organism gets into the bloodstream, then it takes on a life of its own, as I talked about before. So maybe I'll stop there, Paul, and we'll go on with music, and then I can talk a little bit about treatment and also what I saw when I first came here to Arizona 21 years ago.
Looks on me
If I only could have known, I'd have protected you as you protected me. But I never knew, I And if I had, would I have clung to
When I first came here 21 years ago, we were constantly seeing patients on the inpatient service at University Medical Center of young, usually gay men in their 30s and 40s, productive, bright, creative people who were dying of a variety of infections, often with unusual organisms such as bird tuberculosis or of course here in southern Arizona, coccidiomycosis, valley fever. It was a horrible time. It was particularly a horrible time because of all the political implications, they're still with us today, that somehow people who are homosexual are deviant, and that this many of the fundamentalist preachers were saying this was a punishment from God or for this evil behavior that people were having. But even within the administrative situation, of course, since we didn't have gay marriage, the partners were only seen as friends. And so family were allowed to visit these critically ill patients, but there was often, it was often difficult for their partners to come in. So you can just imagine that kind of situation. It created tremendous unhappiness and anger, and it was a very, very difficult time. I would say in my 40 years as a physician, that was the most unpleasant time that I've ever experienced. At that time, we had one antibiotic, one antiretroviral, but it was not 100% effective. And as you know, viruses and bacteria are very clever. They follow Darwin's idea that you kill off the weaker ones, and guess what? The ones of the resistance keep going. And then they multiply, and then so now you have an infection with an organism that doesn't respond to your antibiotics. Well, over the years, with help from the NIH and of course a lot of input from the pharmaceutical industry, there are now multiple antiretroviral drugs, and patients are often treated with at least 3 different ones, so that you basically prevent the virus from being that clever that it can resist all 3 of these antibiotics at the same time. And most patients today, HIV/AIDS is a disease that you live with a long time. There are some side effects from the medications. There are still some risk of infection, but in fact, we expect that most of these people will live the full average American life expectancy. Admittedly, they have to take their medicines, and of course, you have to take good care of yourself in other regards as well. Small infections need to be treated, skin infections, for example, treated quickly and early. Just a couple of words about the politics. I've already mentioned a little bit about the problem that many people who are homophobic, and particularly certain, I would say, less informed religious leaders were announcing that this was a punishment from God. In addition, there were some scientists who felt that the disease was not caused by the retrovirus. A particularly prominent virologist at the University of California, San Francisco, spoke very loudly that this was not the cause of this disease. Unfortunately, the leadership in the Republic of South Africa listened to that and told the citizens in South Africa that really the disease was a result of colonialism and had nothing to do with intercourse, nothing to do with sex. And of course that resulted in a huge spread of the virus, and the #1 death rate in the world right now is in Southern Africa. It's also hard to get treatment out to these folks. The antibiotics are expensive. Even when they've been donated, you have millions of people who are positive now for HIV in South Africa and in many of the other countries in Africa. And so that's where the majority of the mortality rate is right now. It's a huge public health problem. It has resulted in catastrophic events to the economies of these countries. You look at the gross national products in many of the Southern African countries, they're going like this, and they're taking a dive right down into terrible situation. And these are countries that are very poor to start with, so you can imagine it's absolutely catastrophic for the people who live there. So this illness is it's a pandemic, of course. It's in every country around the world, but in Western Europe, the United States, and Japan, and China, countries where there are resources, the disease is usually well handled as long as the patients get into the docks and take their medicines regularly. But in particularly poor areas, and particularly in Southern Africa, it's a total disaster.
Unceremoniously, that I too had the disease, and would be taken from all this, I would think over the years. I had complained too much, the phones ringing constantly. Lucky I was to have so many friends. The hours of my job, fortunate I was to have a job I liked. The lover leaving, oh, but he was there, wasn't he? And in my arms for so long. I should have lived in the moment, kept a secret corner for myself to breathe in, allowed my life to blossom at last, each leaf uncurling, wet with secrecy, to dry in the spring air. I should have taken more risks, won't stick in the mud that I am, a balloon trip over the estuary. Speaking up on behalf of the deaf-mute man at the bay, who was so rudely abused by the teller, that antique bowl with red peonies on it, that I could have bought in a shop in England. I should have sought more balance. Silence, laughter, cool shadow, hot rain, nights drunk on someone, night alone with the dark's quiet watching. I should have followed intuition to the nth degree and trusted it, kept to the singular path, the enticing lane, with plush edges, ripe fruit, and wafting scents that is always there in the heart's eye. And I could have walked it, always prepared, even into death's unknown, and still have been content. Peaceful as a child dawn dreaming, thy open windows before the others are up. And everyone, even the child, is wrenched into the world's bombardment, the maelstrom of appointments, which constitutes a
Now for the good news. I'd like to welcome three remarkable people that I've grown to know in the last week. These are three people who are living with HIV, and each one of them, in discussing his or her story with me, has taught me so much. I'd like to welcome the first, Miguel Moreno. Come and tell us your story.
Hi there, my name is Miguel. First of all, thank you all for coming out and for sitting here and basically listening to me bitch. Like I said, my name is Miguel. I'm 22 years old. I was first diagnosed when I was 19 years old, so I've been positive for about 3 years now. When I was first diagnosed, it was just a routine test, just because, well, I do identify as a gay man. Like, I would always try to make sure I got tested every 3 months. And when I went in there and I got tested and I got my positive test result, I lost it. I was livid for the longest time just because like I'm from a very traditional Roman Catholic family. I mean, HIV, AIDS, homosexuality, things like that, they're not things we talk about. Especially like, you know, in that culture, they're not things we talk about. And that's something that really pisses me off. Just because, just in the past couple of years alone, HIV rates have been like on the rise in the Latino community. Again, because we don't talk about it. One of the reasons why I feel like we don't talk about it is machismo, which is something that, you know, again, big problem in my family. My mom always says the biggest killer of men is machismo, not anything else. But, so just when I got my positive test result, I kind of just went through these emotional stages of just trying to tell people, just because I didn't feel like I could go through it alone. I told my family, and my mom, she was a nurse in the 80s, and she watched, you know, AIDS patients, you know, pass away. So she immediately thought like, oh, this is gonna happen to you, you're gonna wither away, and you're gonna die. And I love her to death, and I hate telling her like, you know, hey, this is something I'm gonna have for the rest of my life, because I mean, there is no cure. And she doesn't think I know this, but I know she stays an hour after Mass every Sunday at her church. And she stays there praying that somehow I'll get cured. So that's really difficult to deal with. I mean, how do you deal with, you know, putting your parents in that sort of situation? My dad, again, very macho guy, he blames himself. It's really strange just because like, yeah, he's my dad, but he always thought of himself as like, you know, he's supposed to protect me. He's supposed to make sure, you know, I grow up without any sort of difficulties in life. So I know there's a lot of guilt in him with that, but I mean, what can you really do? Telling my friends, you know, it's another story. For the most part, they're very supportive, but you have to be careful about who you tell. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge hypocrite because I'm standing up here telling all of you, so. But, you know, I've had, you know, situations here and there where it's backfired on me, but, you know, it's not so bad. You just learn to get through it. Dating, that's probably my biggest issue. It's like, whenever I'm out on a date with a new person maybe I'm interested in, it's always rolling through my mind like, well, when do I tell this person? Because usually they'll have one of three responses. They'll either be okay with it, or say they're okay with it, and then never call me again. And then they could not be okay with it, which is fine too. You know, everybody has their comfort levels, and you learn to live with that. And then there's three, they could be completely okay with it, you know, say like, yeah, this is cool. But then that opens up new difficulties, like, you know, then I get like this thing in my head where I don't want to infect that person, and I could, you know, ruin the relationship myself just from worrying. I mean, all in all, like, I don't really have this figured out yet. I mean, I've been positive for 3 years, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever have it figured out completely. I'm just still trying to just find a balance. But I mean, that's where I'm at right now. And ultimately, you know, I'm not gonna be that person that like sits up here and tells you, wear a condom, blah, blah. But at the same time, I don't regret having HIV, just because like it's taught me to take care of myself a lot more. I've also been able to like turn things like this into a bit of a skill set, and I was able to get a job with the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation. I'm now the new media health education specialist. And I'm like, that's really cool. I honestly never thought, you know, that I would be in that position. So like I said, I'm not gonna be up here and tell you like, you know, wear condoms. But at the same time, you know, love yourself, and you'll figure out what's right for you. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Barb Locke to the stage. This is an incredibly creative person. I had great fun with her having coffee and talking about all sorts of issues. And welcome.
It's an honor to be asked to be here today and to talk with you about my story. I'm going to use my notes because when I talk offhand, I always forget something, a point that I want to make. Can everyone hear me? Or do I need to project more? My allergies are acting up today, so I have a little rough voice. In 2006, I was diagnosed HIV positive when I was 57 years old. For me, it was a struggle to accept that. I wasn't gay. I was white. I was married. I was old. And I was fat. You know, I don't fit any of the figures or any of the risk categories. Now, my mission is to help people understand that women are at risk. And in fact, more women are becoming infected every year. I'm going to read this because I want to get the facts straight. According to the Foundation for AIDS Research, in the United States, women account for more than 1 in 4 new HIV diagnoses and death, which is caused by AIDS. Diagnoses of women have tripled since 1985, and most women contract HIV heterosexually through their boyfriends, husbands, and other men. Here in Pima County, there are about 400 women diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. That's based on the last, not the last census figure, but the one prior to that. We're still waiting for the data from the 2010 census to come through. Those stats should be enough to force some changes in women's health. I know we're having lots of political discussions today about women's health. HIV has not been a routine test given to women through their gynecologists or PCPs. In the past, you had to actually request for and sign a permit to be tested for HIV if you saw a doctor. And HIV was not a screening exam when you were admitted to a hospital or any other health reason that we would have to see a doctor. We weren't at risk. I have several friends who were diagnosed with HIV who were very sick for many years and actually had the doctor test them for many diseases, but they never did the HIV test. So here I am in a clinic in Pinal County talking with a county health nurse in 2006. She asked me a lot of questions and before she gave me the test. It's a risk questionnaire. She was asking me things I'd never heard of before. Like, she asked me, when was the last time I used Special K? I don't eat Special K, I don't like it. Special K is a street drug, and it reduces the, well, it gives someone the feeling that they, to forget their self-protection, that they, you know, as most drugs, it alters your mind and you don't think you're doing anything wrong or different or you're at risk. I was tested in the 90s, the late 90s. I was a health educator in the state of Missouri in what? HIV prevention. This is rather ironic that I knew exactly how to contract the HIV/AIDS virus. I was telling people every day how to prevent the infection. And I was seeing people every day who were HIV positive, who had AIDS. I'd see them getting sicker and sicker, and then a few months later they would be dead. This was also about the time that the cocktails were introduced and people were beginning to live longer, but they had to take 30, 50 pills a day. And those pills made them sick. And in fact, some of those pills helped kill them. So here I am in a clinic, again, facing this test, and I take the exam. I had to almost force her to give me the exam because I didn't fall into any of the risk categories she was asking me about, or any of the drugs she was asking me about, or any other things such as, was I a hemophiliac and so on. I didn't fit any of those questions. So I made her give me the blood test. And there are several ways to be tested, but this was a blood draw. And usually that takes a few weeks to get the results. So she asked me to call her back. So I waited a little while, over a week, and I called her, and she was out of the office. So they said she'd be back the next week. So I called her the next week, and she got on, she was there, she answered the phone, and she said, I need to come out and talk to you. Well, having worked for the health department, I knew that I was positive at that point, because a positive result needs to be presented to someone in person. It used to be, and probably still is, that the minute someone heard they tested positive, they commit suicide, or they do something drastic to hurt themselves or others. So they still come in person, they talk to you. So she came to my apartment, she sat down on the sofa, and she told me I was positive. Of course, I knew that. She also told me that she would put me in contact with the county health nurse. The county health nurse had actually been to my home before. I was married. My husband had been in prison, and the county health nurse was helping him through a program that I believed in, that he told me, so I believed him. Since he had been in prison, there was a new program to reduce recidivism by helping former prisoners find places to live, to help them with medications, and to do other sorts of programs to reduce the risk of them going back to prison. He didn't tell me he had HIV. He never told me he had HIV. So, and we were not living together at the time when I was diagnosed. We'd had a huge fight and split up. So he was living in Eloy, of all places. But I was, he had called me and I said, I need for you to come over, we need to talk. And of course he had no idea what I was calling about. So he came over and I confronted him with the fact that I was positive. And in fact, I had asked him before we got married if he had HIV, and he said no. Come to find out, he's been positive since probably around 1982. He donated blood, and the Red Cross told him, sent a letter and told him he needed to see a doctor. That was usually an indication that you need to see a doctor because you may be infected with HIV. He was married at the time to another woman. She has never been infected. He has 4 children who are not infected. So he's been very lucky. I'm the unlucky one. I married him in the 90s. So, you know, I was in my 50s. He was in his late 40s. I wasn't going to get pregnant. We had unprotected sex because older women don't need to worry about getting pregnant or any of those other issues that we deal with earlier in life. The county health nurse told me about the medical services available to me in Phoenix and in Tucson. Primarily, she was suggesting Phoenix. I was already seeing doctors in Phoenix for other problems I had, and I hated it. I just hated driving that distance and going through all of that traffic. I tried to schedule all of my appointments at the same day, so I'd be going from Scottsdale to Mesa to Apache Junction all in one day. So I was very, very tired of those trips. So one day I drove to Tucson and just kind of went around. I Googled HIV organizations in Tucson, and I found them very easily. The SAFE organization just right up Broadway. And so I stopped there and registered. I also went to El Rio Special Immunology Clinic. It's a very special practice here. I became a patient there, and I want to tell you that I have excellent care. They also have a very holistic program. They help us with nutrition and other issues, drug compliance and so on. I didn't tell anyone at first. I was worried, as we probably most of us are. You know, we have to accept it ourselves first before we talk to anyone else. After about 6 months or so, I called a cousin who's a nurse. And I'm from Missouri. All my family basically is in Missouri. She understood what I was going to be going through, so she knew. And a few months later, I disclosed to another cousin who was a nurse, and she understood. Then I got the courage up to call my brother. My parents are both dead. Most of my relatives are very old. So my brother is a year younger than I am, and we're the only siblings left. So I called him and I told him that I had tested HIV positive, and his response totally blew me away. He said, well, that's nobody's business but yours. So I have shared that now with most of my family. I'm also public about my status because I want people, women, to know that we are at risk, and especially older women, because we do think we have a open lifestyle now that we don't have to worry about any of these diseases or pregnancy or what have you. I was lucky. I was diagnosed early in the stages and I am HIV positive. Many, many women have no idea that they're infected. They may have had a husband who wandered and they don't know that. Or they may have had a husband who did tell them they wandered, but they don't even think about testing for HIV. So most women, or many women, the doctor can say this, but many women wind up in the hospital with 2 CD4 cells. You know, that they're very, very sick and actually maybe at the point of death. And these women are diagnosed with AIDS at that point. And as was mentioned earlier, HIV and AIDS is not an immediate death sentence anymore. But we do have to take these awful medications, sometimes lots of them. When my RNA and DNA was tested, I was discovered to be allergic, or I couldn't tolerate abacavir, which is one of the gold standard entry drugs. And I had already had mental health issues in the past. So Sestiva is another entry-level drug, and that creates vivid nightmares. And some people just have the terrible effect of that. So that was ruled out. So I'm taking AZT and 2 other meds. AZT is what was killing people back in the early 90s and so on. Since then, it's being moderated and smaller doses are being given. It works well for me. I'm living well with my disease. I have some problems, side effects with meds, but I learned how to manage them, basically. I learn which ones that I have to have food with, which ones I need to take in the morning, and so on. And I am 99% compliant. There are a few times when I miss meds, and basically I just miss the time. I have them later in the day than I should. There is a 95% compliance rate that we try to meet, because if we skip drugs or don't take them regularly, we become resistant to that drug, and we have to have a whole new formula of medication. And at some point, we're going to run out of medications unless the research continues and new drugs are introduced. Right now, they're putting more than one drug together in one pill. So if it has abacavir or Sestiva in it, I can't take it. I do want to be open with women, and I am public about my situation. And I have started an organization for women who are living with, called Power Source Tucson. I have a basic flyer at the table about women and HIV, which is just the general statistics and also how to prevent HIV. And I also have a business card there if you want to become more involved. And we do have a very active board of directors. And I would welcome you to maybe donate $5 or $10 this year before you get your tax deduction in a larger amount. We're not yet a 501c3, so we cannot give you any credit for a large deduction. But we do take small amounts of money. Does anyone have questions for me? Thank you.
And lastly, Robert Knight.
Thank you, everyone. I want to start off with, Barbara was giving you a few statistics. So I'm going to start with that before I actually give you my story. What most people don't know is that right now one of the highest infection rates are youth 13 to 24. It is running rampant through that segment of the population because they feel that they're invincible. So they go out and they engage in unsafe sex. The second is women, and it is women 40 to 62. And you know, you think, as Barb was saying, women really, 40 to 62, this is a gay men's disease. The reason 40 to 62 is because they think they can't get pregnant, they're newly divorced, they're running around having a good time, and they don't think about the ramifications. So what happens? The third group is gay men and IV drug users. Currently, gay men are on the rise again, and it's mostly in young gay men because they fit that other category of not worrying about their mortality. And the final one is 75 and up. And you say 75 and up, how can that be? Well, with the introduction with Viagra, we're finding a huge increase in nursing homes, assisted livings, people living on their own, their spouses have passed on, they're back in the dating game, and those are the categories that are becoming infected. So now a little bit about myself. I am the face of AIDS. As the doctor was saying before, there's HIV and then there's AIDS. In 1997, I was diagnosed, as Barb said, with 2 T cells. I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS. I'm a 6'1" man, and I weighed 118 pounds. Totally oblivious. I worked till 2 days before. I was a hospital administrator, so people would say, how did everybody in the hospital not notice? Well, when you're flying around the hospital and everybody's really busy, nobody pays attention, as I'm sure the doctor can attest to. So my friends, I was actually out of state, flew me back to my home, and they brought me into the hospital, and my viral load was so high they could not even detect it. I had pneumocystis pneumonia, which is the pneumonia that is HIV related, and I also had cryptococcal meningitis. And they told me that I was on my way out, that there really was no chance for me to live. Well, lo and behold, you see me sitting before you. That doesn't come without a very, very long history. After a year, I did go back to work. I only took a year off. I wasn't quite back to what we would consider a normal weight. But now, over the course of the past 16 years, I just celebrated 16 years of new life, as I call it. I have had pneumocystis pneumonia 20 times. I have had cryptococcal meningitis 4 times. And in this past year, last September, I was diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is a Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I was given, without treatment, less than 2 weeks to live, and less than a 40% chance to live with treatment. On March 20th of this past year, I had my last chemo and I sit before you. It is a disease that you can control with medication, but it's still a very, very long, hard road. And it's all about how you keep your attitude going. It's getting up every day and doing what you need to do and not letting the disease set you back, not, trying to keep a positive attitude. And so now I volunteer at the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation. I'm a peer counselor there. I donate my time and I work with people who are newly diagnosed. And I was one of those people, as Barb had said, who did not let anybody know. The first 13 years of my disease, only 2 people knew. And it's because the first person I told rejected me so horrifically that growing up in that time of the disease where people were falling and just dying immediately, I didn't want to be shunned. So it wasn't until in 2010 when I stopped working because, once again, I had pneumocystis, and the doctors finally came in and said, do you want to live or do you want to die? You got to stop working. I told my family, and big positive response, and not the fact that I had AIDS, but that I finally had the strength to come out and tell them. And I actually didn't tell the world until this past March. This past March, I came from Maine out here to have my treatment for cancer. And in Maine, I'm what's called an HIV warrior. And it's a person who fights the stigma to do with HIV. You see, HIV is a virus. Stigma is the disease. Stigma is the disease. And that's because people do not educate themselves on knowing about the risks or knowing about the ways that you can contract it. As the beautiful music that we've heard today, you can't get it from a touch or a hug or a kiss or a surface. And so because of that, that's where the stigma comes in. And so as an HIV warrior, I realized, how the heck can I be a warrior and stand up and fight for this disease and try to eliminate stigma if I'm not open and honest? And so I typed up a little summary on Facebook, good old Facebook, and I hit send. And the responses have been great. And now it is my goal in my life, whatever time I'm given left, to get out and do things like this and to speak to people and eliminate as much of the stigma as we can. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Before one last song, I'd like to say, of course, this is not the end of the story, but perhaps the end of a chapter. Of course, we've come to realize that AIDS is a worldwide concern that touches men, women, and children. And it is our hope that we celebrate this World AIDS Day, which is the 25th, with the hope that every day is a day in which we work for a cure. I want to thank the people who spoke today, Dr. Albert and Miguel Moreno, Barb Locke, and Robert Knight, who were so open about sharing their stories. It takes a lot of guts to get up there and say this. I want to also thank Ethan Smith-Cox and Vera Bowlby of the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation for all their help in putting me in touch with these wonderful people who I've come to know and hope to continue to know. And I'd like to thank our singers, Hunter Knott, Seth Kershiznik, and Kimberly Prince-Muller. And Kimberly stepped in at 24 hours notice to take the place of Stephanie Brink, who has a throat infection, but who is here. So I have a lot of thanks worldwide and room-wide, and we'd like to end with an ordinary song.
In the morning, 14 pills at night, 30 pills each day combined, in magic ways still undefined. Give me an ordinary life. be shaped like a diamond or a depth chart, hieroglyphs and runes inscribed in colors bright like evergreen, and robin's egg and tangerine. My recipe for ordinary life. One ordinary morning in gratitude and gloom, you were still sleeping in the other room. I took my pills and bottles down, sat on the floor, and circled them around me. Soon and without warning, I was reciting all their names. Raltegravir, Efavirenz, Zidovudine, Marivoroc, a pharmaceutical rosary, quite ad hoc. Soon and without warning, I was reciting all their names and begging for the blessing they convey, to let me stay with you forever, to let us both grow old together, until I die in some ordinary
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank my friend Hirsch for sending that last piece to us. He just finished that piece, and I thought it was really a beautiful way to end the creative collaboration. So I'd like to bring in Javier Duran, and he will say goodbye, and we will see you next year. All right.
I just want to thank everyone and our guests for sharing their stories and for reminding us that there's a lot to do. And we want the Conference Center to be at the forefront of these conversations, and especially educating our society about the grand challenges that we face every day in different topics. Again, thank you for your presence, thank you for following us, and we hope to see you in our events in the upcoming year here at the bookstore, downtown, or in our venues of the university. And also, again, thank you to Paula Fan for really bringing these issues, working with colleagues and with the community to make us better. Happy holidays, and yes, important thing. Sorry.
Stu just told me we won by 2 points. Yay! See, the shirt worked.
That was the basketball team. Yes. You care about those things. But here, we're the U of A, so it's good to be number one. That's right. And we hope to make Conference Center number one too this upcoming year. Thank you so much. Enjoy your holidays, and we hope to see you soon.